Welcome back to the booth. Today I want to talk about the Deluge or the Deluge synthesizer by synthstrom. What's happening with it? How is it changing? And what does that mean to you? Back in summer of 2023, Deluge went open source, which means if you have a Deluge and you have the skills and the interest, you can start to develop stuff for the Deluge that will be implemented into special features. Community features is what they call it. So it's the community of users, things that they wanted to integrate, change, evolve, implement. So it's happening now, and they just keep adding to it. Originally, it was like effects and things. So they went from a free verb to they got the mutable instruments reverb that was like so much better. Some people did upgrades to LFO shapes and modulation matrix. People added some different functionality around the sequencer, behavioral modifications in terms of how you interact with the synth, how you can access things and change things. Just basically being able to customize things. These include shortcuts, all sorts of different things. Well, this continues to happen, and people keep coming up with new ideas and implementing them into these community features. You just download them, put them on your SD card, boot up your synth, and tell it to look for the new firmware, and all of a sudden you have all these new features. I just wanted to look at a few of them because some of them are really powerful, and I thought they should be addressed. There's quite a few other people out there doing more in-depth videos on how to use the new community features. Make sure that you go online and check that out because there's lots of great information out there. I'm just going to point out a few things that I thought were really useful, really helpful, that you may not be aware of. So you can basically use these new features if you like them. If you decide to just stick with the way that you know the operation of your Deluge, you can do that totally. You don't have to stick with the new stuff. You can go back to the other firmware. The new community features, the new firmware, came out on December 25th, so Christmas. So Merry Christmas to all you users. Now here's all this free, cool, new functionality. One of the new features is a DX7 emulation. So if you're into that old Yamaha DX7 sound, you can actually import patch banks from old DX7 stuff, sysx files, and get those sounds. There's things like multi-track audio export. So basically, you've come up with a piece of music where you've got like synths and leads and drums and all these different things, and now you can actually export those like audio stems to be used in your DAW for mixing or stuff like that. Really cool. There's some different keyboard layouts, some different keyboard scales, as well as user scales. Now you can create your own custom scales and save those. And they keep revising some of these chord modes, which I'm going to look at because I think they're quite useful, including chord modes like a chord library, chord memory. So we'll take a look at all that stuff as well. As the community firmware evolves, it continually gets revised, and you can do things like automate all sorts of parameters that you could never do before. One of the things you just have to be aware of is, aside from uploading the firmware onto your Deluge, you also have to go in on a menu, and some of them you have to actually turn them on or off because they do change the functionality of some of the knobs and the navigation, the way it works. So you actually have to go in and enable certain community features or disable them. And that's great because that way you can turn on the ones that you want to explore. If you don't like them, you can turn them off, which I think is really healthy because they do affect the way information is presented. Sometimes you'll step into a different mode and your display along the screen, which is all the pads, will change. So it's good to be able to turn off those features if you don't like them, aren't going to use them, because that way you're back to your familiar territory of how you interact with the device. So let's just take a look at the new community features on the open source firmware for the Deluge.
So one of the first things I want to talk about is the setup that they have changed for the kit. So here's a kit, a bunch of sounds. I can go through and audition them. The way it's always worked. But one of the cool things is now when we hit this button, the keyboard button, it assigns these drum sounds to pads here. Now, the reason that you have so many of them is now these are velocity. So each one gets a little bit louder as we progress from the bottom left and then row by row up to the top. So I can step through the different sounds here. So now you have the ability to play parts in with velocity. So that's really cool. But something that you couldn't do previously is take a sound and modify it. Up until recently, you couldn't do that. So that's really great. The other thing is you take a look at this grid, and by holding Shift and then doing this, now I can get to all these. This is one sound. This is second sound. But these are all different velocity levels. So if I pick a... So now for people that like to finger drum, so way more controllable there. The other thing you can do as I shrink it back the other way is I get more sounds available, but less volume. So, but less velocity. So this is only 9 different velocity levels. And I can go to, there's a lot of sounds in this kit. So here, now I can play all these different sounds. Of course, you only have 4 velocities per, but it's pretty great. Now, something else I want to point out is that let's say I want this sound. I want to add reverb to this sound. But the other sounds don't have reverb. Maybe I want to add delay to this one. So now, so you do have the ability to tailor the sounds once you're in this mode, which you could not do before. So let's move into something else. Let's play that back. Let's look at the way we can automate features. I hit clip again, and this comes up. This pattern of lights that you see here, each one of them represents a parameter that can be automated. So there's quite a few different things. So first of all, I'm going to pick the release, and now when we play, so what I've done is drawn in an automation for how much release I want on these notes. Now, I'm going to pick filter. Now I'm going to automate the filter cutoff. Just something a little interesting for us to hear. So you can get a sense that pretty quickly you can make things very interesting. I know this is a really boring sequence, but the idea is that you can go in and automate all of these different parameters to keep the sound changing over time. So now I'm going to automate reverb. Just going to put some in this section, maybe a little bit here. So now we're going to be hearing the automated release to the automated filter, and now reverb amount. Anyway, it just gives you the idea that there's a lot of power right there. The next thing I want to look at is the system that they have for chords. So right now I have this in a minor mode. My root note is B. couple of different things that we can do in terms of the layouts here. I just hold down this keyboard button and I turn the encoder one click clockwise to the right. Now, what we're seeing, we're still in B minor. All of the notes on the pads are all in the scale of B minor. So now everything you see here, these brighter ones are octaves. So you can't play a wrong note. Cool, but here's something we can take it one step further. Hold the keyboard icon again, go one more, and this is where we get into the new mode. So now, these are all chords related to that B minor scale. And as we move higher, these are the notes of the B minor scale, but the relative chords. And as I move this way, we just go higher in octaves. Now it also tells you here what the chord is, whether it's a minor or a sus or a major or whatever. So that's one view of it. Here's another view. Still all within B minor. All of these notes to the left are different notes within that scale. All these notes you can use them together. So even if you're not into music theory, it's great because you can really experiment and get a lot of different stuff happening there. As we scroll up and down, just different octaves. One more thing we can do, I turn it one more time, and now we have a completely different arrangement. Now, all these notes along the bottom are chromatic, every note that could be played on a keyboard. The brighter lines here are octaves. And as we move this way, same thing, more octaves. 12 notes per octave. But as we go up, we start hearing chords. There's the B, major, minor, 6, and so on. So now, you really get the idea that there are so many inversions available. And if you look at this column on the right-hand side, you see there are 8 that are a different color. So as I move this, now there are 8 more chords. And more. So in all, there are 32 different chords, all with B as their root and all relative. So really useful there. Very interesting for experimenting, as you can see. Here's another feature. If I hold this button on the top left and turn to the right, I now have slots for chord memory. So if I hit this button while holding a chord, it saves it. There you go, chord memory. Let's start to call up some different sounds and see how this can be useful for experimentation. Can you go back to this other mode? So back in this layout, I'm going to play some strings. And our chord memories still work here. And if we found another chord we liked, now that's available to us. I'm going to switch to another mode again. We're back here. Going to add that. So if we call in some different types of sounds. And here's an electric guitar sound. Very interesting, very useful. Choir and strings. So even with a very limited knowledge of music theory, you can pretty easily start to kind of come up with compositional ideas and just try them out here. Let's turn on the arpeggiator. So as you can see, it's very useful, very interesting, a lot of fun to play with. So I think you'll get the idea. You can use it a lot of different ways. And I find as I experiment with different sounds, it suggests all sorts of things that I probably would never have come around to using anything else. So you get the idea that pretty quickly you can add all sorts of things to change the sound over time. And there are so many parameters that can be modulated here. So like I said, tip of the iceberg here. One other thing I'll show you, there is a granular engine that is now available. Just going to do a little bit of piano here. Going into the community features menu. So I go into the modulation effects, turn on grain. Not the most powerful granular thing, but but there's some granular modulation there, and there's a few parameters. Like I said, just the tip of the iceberg here.
Well, that's it for today. As you can see, it's pretty powerful. There's some really cool stuff going on, and it is changing all the time. There's new features coming out pretty regularly, and very easy, free, and awesome. See you next time.